Michael, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're over in America, so I really appreciate your time and coming to chat to me. You're a clinical psychologist and someone that has a spiritual sense about them as well. I know that is a big part of your work. Um, so yeah, maybe even if you just tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your journey to becoming a psychologist and doing the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And yes, I have been bridging the worlds of psychology and spirituality for a long time. I suppose throughout my life, I was kind of a mystic by nature. I'm fairly introverted, um, and I always was looking inward and observing. And I think I had a kind of a spiritual inclination to myself, to my character for a long time. So I I was initially studying international relations, European history, all that kind of thing in college, and I had a great time with that. Um, and all my ancestors are like from Europe and recently from Europe, and I studied in the Netherlands, and I was very much inspired by that experience and discovering the world in a sense back then. In this was 1995. I went abroad to study in Amsterdam, where my grandfather was born, and at that year in college, I actually roomed with a guy who was very spiritual himself, was very much into existential philosophy. He read a lot of literature, and at that point in my life, um, this this I I started reading books and sort of writing poetry, uh, kind of inspired by his example. And I found myself diving into that more inner world, right? That sort of like that great conversation, as they call it, of literature and humanistic studies. And um, this ignited a philosophical quest in me for truth and to understand human nature. So I think that some of that exterior focus that I'd had in college, studying politics, history, whatever, kind of went to the back seat a little more, and I felt like I was ignited really on some kind of search, and after that, and after I graduated college, I still had this love of the world and understanding history and all that kind of thing, but I went more and more inward. I just kept reading books, novels, poetry, and then eventually that led me into psychological books, books on Buddhism, books on religion, all that kind of thing. And then I had a friend who, a kind of a mentor, a woman I dated, and she kind of said, why don't you keep going in that direction? And if you're going to take some courses in Washington, D.C., where I lived at the time, this was after college, why don't you take the courses in counseling and don't take the courses in history? You've already done a lot of that. Take these courses in counseling and that kind of thing. And I guess that was it. I just kind of felt like these are my people. I was among a lot of empathic, feeling types, which I started to find out that's really who I was all along, was a more sensitive kind of feeling based person, although I'm fairly intellectually inclined, I would say. I'm really a feeler at heart. And so at one point, I took a training in life coaching. And
Mm.
I thought, well, maybe I'll do this as a cool kind of job, and make some money. And I dove into this seminar and training on coaching, and we had to just go face to face with each other and open our intuition and just give voice to what we sensed and things. And that was it. I just knew that working one on one with people was my thing.
Mm.
I'm actually an intuitive feeling type. So archetypally in Jungian personality theory, that's like the healer archetype. It's really someone who's a deep listener by nature, and my intuition is actually extroverted. It's called extroverted intuition. So it's actually pointed outward. So it's very keen on seeing the potentials and possibilities and hidden connections in people. So once I found that and then started reading some books on from like Carl Jung's autobiography and things like that, it came home to me like I'm going to become a depth psychologist. That's who I am. Um, and then there was kind of a spiritual search that kind of intensified from there. So that's kind of the basics of how I found my way to this calling of a profession.
Um, Such a profound insight to have. At what age were you when you kind of was started the counseling course?
I was about 25 or 26.
Think
And
incredible to learn that about yourself at that age, I find, and to have the awareness to understand that that was your skill and that was the type of person that you are. Because I think a lot of people um, don't have that, yeah, full understanding of themselves, especially in that manner, to understand that you were like how your intuition worked and that that you related to these people because you're a very feelings-based person, is such an awesome experience, I imagine, to have at that age, and just to set you on the right path for where you're meant to be going.
absolutely. And it was the damnedest thing, Aaron. I mean, this important woman came into my life. Her name is Emily, and she became a dear friend. And she kind of said like, because I was a little more identified with the intellect, right? I mean, I'd been in school my whole life, and I was pretty good at that, right? And I liked studying a lot of different subjects.
Mm.
Um, as many intellectually inclined people do. But she kind of like helped awaken me. She said, Your real gift is your sensitivity, you know? And like, yeah, she said, you have a fine mind and all, but your gift is your sensitivity. And she kind of like cracked this defensive shell a bit in me at the time too. So I actually went through a kind of emotional awakening where even though I was always a feeler, right, I wasn't really as open back then, and I went through this kind of opening, and then yeah, after work starting to work with people, I found out yeah, I'm really more
Mm.
inclined toward this inner life and what's going on with people emotionally and all that. So
I think the
it
right,
was quite a breakthrough, and
yeah,
I'll say that from the age 21 and onward, let's say, it was driving me crazy. What should I do with my life?
yeah.
Where like I really needed to find my calling,
Mm.
and I did. By the grace of God, I did. So
Mm. But even to have the sense of like I want to know what I am and what I want to do at 21 is a great thing. Like just to be that inquisitive about your own self from 21 on, is probably why you came across what you needed to do at such a young age. And the right woman will definitely facilitate some growth like that. Like you need, I think, sometimes that for a woman to crack you open, kind of like, and expand your idea a little bit about what your certain parts of life are. So that's yeah, that's so good. And I guess in regards to that, would you have any tips for, say, someone of that age, 21 to 25, that is struggling with that like identity and asking themselves some serious questions about like what am I meant to be doing? What is my purpose? Or um, someone say like yourself that might be in the same shoes as you but still hasn't found that. Do you have any like tips or suggestions for them? Some words of advice on how to go about finding what might be your path in life?
sure, I help a lot of young men with this. Usually they're a bit older than 21, but they're in their early 20s.
Yep.
You have to start with understanding your personality
Mm,
type. and you really have to get into like what are the strengths and gifts that you have? Where do you feel a sense of enthusiasm? So a lot of us just won't really know, and there's likely to be some baggage, that we need to unpack from our childhood, and some young men and young women are sort of off and running pretty well with what they're doing. They're able to find a job in a kind of a direction, and for some it's more difficult. So we'd have to kind of see what are the obstacles in the way. But it really starts with understanding yourself and your personality type.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Some self-awareness and
Hmm.
yeah, I think knowing your strengths and weaknesses is a big one, right? Like what do you enjoy, but then also what are you good at? Uh, and as you said, like you had kind of realized that you were a feelings person, but although you were introverted, because it's like a hard thing as an introvert to put yourself out there and, maybe a bit confronting doing this one-on-one stuff. So I think you're right, understanding who you are as a person is important, but it can also be tough at that age. Like you kind of probably grappling with that a little bit, I think, for some guys, and especially in the modern day, I think it's like can be very confusing for men.
It is, it is, and I wanted to say that I talk a lot about the puer aeternus pattern, the Peter Pan kind of pattern, and
I wanted to ask
that
you that.
some young men and some young women are in that pattern. But we'll just talk about men for the sake of simplicity.
Can you explain what that term means to maybe people that haven't heard it before?
Yes, puer aeternus is the Latin word for eternal child, and there's an archetype of the divine child in us. In Jungian psychology, we identify that archetype, and it means that there's a lingering fixation in the mentality of adolescence in the young adult, that they want to cling to a kind of sense of pure potential and freedom of the child, and we need the divine child in us. It is an okay archetype, but this kind of the inability of the young adult to move onward and to take some of the enthusiasm and inspiration from that child archetype and move it into more concrete actions in life, that that fixation or inability keeps them more stuck in that archetype. And then from there they kind of often get into a kind of like a philosophical escapism, almost that almost would make you to be like an old man, right? And it's like someone who is, I'm trying to go above life. I'm really trying to get beyond it. And it's like you're 22 and you don't know anything, but you're trying to become the old sage already. And you feel on the one hand so young and so free, and on the other hand, you feel like this old man who's so burdened by life, and life is such a pain, and it's I'm weary of the world, and let me just drink in some more stoicism or Nietzsche or Buddhism or some kind of little more like very abstract philosophy, or I'll become a hardcore revolutionary communist or something. I'm going to change the world because the world's not good enough for me, even though you don't know anything and you've never done anything. So that's the fixation. But what I wanted to say is that uh, some of the young men will hear me talking about getting well adjusted in life, getting more kind of rooted in taking on some responsibilities and finding your place in life. And they will think that means that I'm suggesting that you take on, just commit to a kind of a conventional life,
Mm.
and to sort of just take on commitments just because that'll make you more mature. No, I'm not saying that at all. So when we're asking, how do you help someone in their early 20s to find their way, there has to be a bridge between their own enthusiasm, their own personality type, and sorry, there's a blower outside in the neighbor's yard.
That's right.
There has to be a bridge between their personality type and enthusiasms and these new commitments that they make. And
Yeah.
that's what you really want to do because you want the person to be sort of aligning with themselves. You want them to be moving at least in the direction of their enthusiasms and talents rather than completely against it just in order to grow up.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's like that's why I think some people find it tough because there's societal expectations that are like, well, you should be doing this at a certain point in your life. You should have this or whatever. Um, so I guess you're weighing those expectations against finding something that is, depending on the type of person you are, but finding something that is fulfilling for you and that you may deem to be your purpose or your path in life. Um, yeah.
Well,
Uh,
let's,
yeah.
right. I just wanted to say, let's think about, I mean, because a lot of times people mention societal expectations and they sometimes they mention that as like that's just a negative thing. Like society expects this, society demands that, society tells you this. Well, first of all, there's no one monolithic voice of society, right? There are voices telling you to settle down and have a traditional life. And then there are voices telling you screw that. And so there are many different voices, right?
Mm.
But societal expectations, generally speaking, means kind of the collective universal demand to grow up, right? It just means there are developmental demands. But we can interpret those narrowly and rigidly, or we can interpret those as this is kind of just a part of life. I
Mm.
can be an eccentric artist type of person, but I still have to find my way to make a livelihood. You
Mm.
you can do it your way, but you kind of need to be somewhat adjusted to your society,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And that's the way in which Jungian psychology isn't like it's not another escape where it's saying you can just be who you are, and once you awaken from this world, you none of this crap matters. And you know, there are these videos online that are kind of portraying Jung as if he was saying that kind of thing. Like
Mm.
once you awaken, he didn't even talk in terms of awakening, but they kind of portray it as if like only the inner life matters, only the spiritual quest matters, and that's what Jung said, or that's what whoever said.
Mm.
But in Jungian psychology and developmental psychology in general, we're not dismissing the needs of the world. It's a balance,
Mm.
and it's in that tension between the individual and the society uh, that we have to find the balance, right? Uh, we can't reject anything about it. We can't reject the needs and the norms of our society, or the needs, for example, of our physical body as opposed to our spiritual needs. Right? These are all the opposites that make up the world. As like it's a very Taoist or Chinese
Yeah.
wisdom point
Yeah.
that Jung acknowledged. These are opposites that need to be harmonized instead of thinking you can escape to only one and blot out all the rest, right?
Yeah. It's like the yin and the yang. You need, there's two sides. Conflict and resolution is a big part of life. So, um, I think the
Yeah,
quicker you get good at that and understand that yeah, you're right. You can't just go all the way in on your eccentricities and hide yourself away and be writing poems or painting the whole time. There's a balance in life that you need to find, and that's with anything you do. Like there are realities that we exist within in this world that need to be attended to function as a human.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so what would you say? So you're a clinical psych. Do you see men and women?
I do. Yeah. Adult men and women and couples as well.
Oh, awesome. What would you say, like the main issues, without going in depth, like some of the main issues that men are coming to you with? Like, do you notice a trend in what you're seeing in like your clients in terms of their needs and their issues in regards to like the male population that you see?
Um, I think that a lot of well, I see men in their 20s, 30s and up.
Yeah.
So they have all kinds of different issues. I mean, it's all the same. Honestly, it's all the same developmental stuff, really. And a lot of every man is different.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure of the themes. Like there are, of course, there are men who are less grounded in their masculine nature. They've maybe been disempowered in some way. They've been
Yeah.
warded away in some way from their masculinity. They haven't embraced it. They don't know what it is. There are men who are more already more practical thinking types who are pretty good in the work area but less skilled in relationships.
Mm.
Then there are the men who are more pretty good with relationships and all that, but are having trouble with career and things like that. But there are also men who are, I treat men who are in their 60s and who are just looking for deeper self knowledge and a kind of spiritual wisdom that doesn't come from books,
Mm.
but is more like a deep psychological understanding of who they are and what their life is about. And that is very, that's very Jungian work,
Mm.
detecting like where they're at existentially. Um,
Which is an
a
interesting.
lot of the young men, I would just want to say, a lot of the young men I've seen, they're coming to me because of the Peter Pan type of patterning. They're very sensitive, bright young men, and they're trying to like get more. I always think of it as like there's something gooey in the middle still, there's still something soft and kind of unformed, and that's partly natural to your young adulthood, but it's natural to you. We want to firm that up and we want to kind of clarify and activate. And so I'm also like on that note, I'm very like sometimes I see that when I look around at fellow Jungians and others, like there's almost this, even if I look at the men, like there's almost this veil of femininity about them, like that we as, therapists or spiritual types or whatever, it's almost like taking on this veil of effeminate qualities or just very soft, like that some of the Jungians or spiritually oriented therapists or healers who are in their 60s, 70s, the boomers. Some of them are just they're very bright and wise, but they have this kind of like feminine they like aspect to them that I find myself put off by it.
Mm.
It's almost as if there's this expectation that to be a sensitive and more conscious person, you have to be more effeminate as a man. And so a lot of what I do is kind of like, look, I'm not a former Navy SEAL or anything, but it's, I did have my testosterone tested recently. It was in the highest 99th percentile.
Yeah.
So like, I know I found over time that I was a more masculine man by temperament,
Mm.
but I didn't always know that. And I just find that there's this initiating of young men and helping them with their own masculinity and having that involves kind of having certain binary choices and distinctions of what is true versus false rather than just having a totally relativistic and hazy view of everything and always being purely diplomatic or agreeable rather than you need a certain amount of disagreeability in you or aggression or you can have even a healthy sense of anger in certain moments,
Mm.
but it's not chronic anger, it's just motivating kind of energy almost. So
Mm.
that's kind of what I embody and help to bring to certain men. And then with others, with other people I treat, it's really not part of the work,
Mm.
it's nothing to do with that.
Super interesting because I think the idea of toxic masculinity that was became a big buzzword in the last few years is probably, and I don't know if it's set, we talked about societal expectations, but it's set like that tone of what it is to be a man, maybe on an interesting course, because people might have been afraid to embrace these ideas of like being a man and the traits that come along with that. Um, and it's funny that you mentioned the like healers and spiritual people and but even therapists, because of feeling in generalities and it can be seen as a very feminine thing to do when, you know, I think people lump that into the category of a feminine kind of trait to be very feelings based, whereas a man is meant to be stoic and stuff like that. So I think the balance is like an interesting thing because I'm also a very feelings based person. Um, so I understand what you're saying. Like, uh, finding that balance is very important. But also that's why I think it's an interesting time for young guys because it's like, well, what is the idea of being a man? What traits do I embody? Um, what's attractive to a female? Like what masculine traits are attractive to a female? Um, and I wonder, like, not to get too in the weeds, but you know, this gender identity thing's a huge thing now, and you are seeing more people that are, you know, identifying as like different on different spectrums and stuff like that. So yeah, I wonder if that's the culture or that's just like the direction we're heading. But yeah, it's super interesting that you kind of identify that the masculine stuff and are helping men with that.
Yeah, there's so there's a difference between relating to the feminine and valuing feminine values,
Hmm.
whether in ourselves as men or as women or in society, versus taking on a kind of mantle of effeminacy.
Hmm.
Now, a woman, when she's feminine, it is femininity. When a man is taking on the mantle of the feminine in a less conscious way, it is not the feminine, it is effeminacy.
Hmm.
And that is something very different. It is less natural and less purely helpful. Now, when a masculine man integrates the feminine, he becomes more of a genuine, conscious, warm hearted, inspired, balanced man.
Yep.
And if he does not do that, then he will tend to get feminized from within through the unconscious in a negative way that will weaken him, actually.
Hmm.
So I know it's getting very Jungian here, but
Yeah, it's good.
so it's a matter of what we're consciously embodying. But
Hmm.
what has happened in society, and I'm going to make it brief because it's a huge subject, but
Yep.
there's been a feminization in many domains of our discourse um, that is not so natural and not so helpful for men,
Hmm.
where, in a sense, feminine values have been proclaimed as if they are supreme. And you mentioned like toxic masculinity. There's almost like an inability to discern between what is simply masculinity
Yes.
versus what is toxic, what could be toxic or a kind of hyper masculine, unconscious masculinity.
Hmm.
And I think what people are searching for is the conscious or positive sense of the thing, but then they start to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Hmm.
As to the one more thing I'll say about the masculine is like the masculine perspective, masculine thinking and mentality, it is a lot rougher in certain ways than many women know,
Hmm.
right? It just is different.
Hmm.
And masculine men know this, and a lot of women may not appreciate the depth of the difference, as well as many young men who have not really embraced their masculine or discovered it.
Hmm.
I don't mean a fake embracing of like a phony masculinity. I mean
Yeah.
actually integrating it. they'll be like, "Oh, I'm being too harsh," or "That's too." They have no grip on like just what it would mean to genuinely be masculine, and that it is not. Uh, it seems a lot harsher or rougher than what you're used to, but it is also entirely normal.
Yeah. And I
And
guess,
it's almost frightening for these young men because they're afraid of their own aggression and power.
mm, I think, uh, I think a lot of it also can come down to you see a lot now. There's a lot of like split homes, a lot of divorce. Like divorce is huge here in Australia. I know, and I know there's studies that have come out of the UK in regards to their young men and the lack of role models that they have, like healthy masculine role models. Less male teachers, a lot of single mums that are raising boys, and it's now creating a lot of issues with kids going on to study and work and stuff like that. A lot of youth crime, but I think the lack of a strong male role model to pattern off, I think is important. Like, yeah, you're going to have this inherent sense of what it is to be a man that just is genetically there and that's part of your DNA, but also you need someone to look up to and to like model strong masculine traits from. And I think that's a huge issue that there's a lack of that for young men growing up, maybe.
That, that's absolutely true. And I had an experience recently in a cafe. I saw a woman with a little boy who was about 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old.
Mm,
And I want to say that there was just something off or kind of phony that I heard in her voice, the way she was talking to him. I didn't feel that she was all that authentic in some way. And there were things she was saying to him, and I thought, my God, I can see how this boy would just totally lose, like never have a positive sense of himself as a little boy.
mm.
It was just an intuition. I'd have to really show you what I saw, but
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
like I was fortunate to have a mother who was very feminine and really loved having two boys and just let us run free and was very like positive about her boys. And then I had my father, and then eventually I had my stepfather as a sort of like a male figure to pattern off of.
Mm,
But related to that, and you mentioned the gender identity stuff. Yes, there's feminization in the culture going on. We could talk about, but some of the what people don't appreciate enough is that a lot of gender identity, any identity issues, are often coming about for people with borderline issues.
mm,
And I don't mean borderline personality disorder. I mean the borderline as the construct between neurotic, borderline, and psychotic.
mm,
The real deeper issues with identity, with who you are on a deep level, these are these are borderline-ish issues. So when you're not sure who you are and you have an inner sense of emptiness and you're like, who am I? Maybe I'm a woman, maybe I'm a man. These are borderline-ish zone area issues, analytically speaking. And people can just they can deny that all they want. But what's happening is there's a weakening of fundamental identity almost because there's this, I think partly because there's kind of a lack of solid parenting going on, like that's across the world. And
mm,
we're almost being taught a kind of amorphous kind of selfhood that, and I think that some of the spiritual themes and teachings play into that as well. And those are trends that I've been opposed to as well with the escapist kind of spirituality, which I don't know if you wanted to get into that whole path. And
mm,
but I see a lot of deeper issues with identity and yeah, like almost like a rejection of nature and humanness going on in the
mm.
culture.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's just the culture dictates a lot and the social discourse and what's happening in the world. And I think parenting's super important because even just a little bit I've started to learn about like developmental psychology. you are learning a lot socially, not from your parents, but from your friends. And that as a kid growing up in your friendship groups, that's where a lot of your learning occurs within those groups. And so once that identity stuff is now ingrained in like young people, like you have a lot of this gender identity stuff happening at a young age. Once it starts to move around in the circle, so you're learning and picking up a lot from there. So I wonder how much effect. I don't want to get stuck on this either because it's probably not. We could talk about this all day, but I wonder how much
It's a
effect.
big, it's a big
Yeah,
topic. Yeah.
huge. And it's like a very sensitive topic, and I don't want to like, yeah, dive too deep into it. But yeah, I just wonder how much effect really parents can have once it starts to really ingrain itself in a culture, and kids are so. Uh, Worried and kind of obsessed about being cool and being popular and being part of the group. And when that gets into that kind of element of things, it's it can be a hard thing to manage or even just be supportive of or understand. So, but yeah, as I said, we could talk about that that all day. Um, I wanted to ask
Hmm.
about your spiritual journey because I know again, going back to the masculine thing, I think for some men, they might have this sense or idea of spirituality, but then the spiritual stuff kind of gets lumped into a feminine kind of side of things as well. It can be seen as a feminine trait or a feminine quality or a feminine ideal. Um, and for some men, it might seem a bit woo-woo. So I just wonder how, firstly, maybe if you want to talk about your experience and how you kind of came across spirituality and started to identify with it, but then also how you kind of integrate that into yourself as like a man, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure. Well, I think the first thing that I want to say before I go into like my experience is, 'cause I had a sort of a classic, maybe mystical experience, but the first thing I want to say is that from a from a Jungian perspective, maybe it's not just Jungian, but from that perspective, life and the psyche, the life path of development and the psyche can be seen as containing the spiritual meaning of our lives and something. It's a process by which the spiritual significance, depth, love, radiance, joy, and meaning of our lives is found and discovered over time through our psychological development, or or it can be seen as there are these more philosophical abstract views that say, well, your mind is that's just the ego down here, and you
Mm,
need to wake up because the purpose of life is to avoid suffering, stop suffering, and realize that you are nobody or something like that. And I just am completely opposed to that idea. Uh, I see a lot of men getting trapped and women getting trapped in these ideas and thinking that if this or that teacher had some kind of insight or experience that seemed to liberate them, then whatever they say must be the truth. It must be like the gospel truth about the nature of life. It's like boom, the riddle of life is solved. The riddle of the universe. Now you know everything, and I think it's just a great deception.
mm,
Um, but I wanted to say on that note, like any kind of philosophy, it could be it could be Western, it could be more Eastern, whatever. Anything that's telling you to detach and that's giving you this kind of grandiose explanation for everything and telling you like you're not limited to this and you're not limited to that, it's going to feel liberating, like in many ways for you. If you sort of really take that on, you're going to see a truth in it.
mm,
You're gonna like have initial experiences of like I was much more free of those thoughts, or the way I was telling myself that story about I'm a shy and vulnerable person. Well, now I'm getting more distance from those thoughts, so now I'm so much more free. And you start to think that this whole philosophy you're taking on of, let's say identifying only with awareness, you start to think that must be the truth and that's the way for us. But I just simply hold that the psyche is a reality. It is the soul. It is the psyche, the soul, the spirit, and the world is all inextricably connected. And I don't believe in any kind of denial of that, which leads me to say, yes, I had a transcendent experience of consciousness where it was, in some sense, discovered, I experienced a kind of pure consciousness and energetic awakening that was, I guess, life changing in some ways.
Mm.
But I ended up completely leaving behind all the non dualistic and Eastern teachings associated with it as
Mm.
I came to interpret it in different ways than that. But it was life, it was positive
Mm.
and very powerful.
Yeah,
Uh, and it but it's not really the most important thing necessarily to me anymore.
yeah, yeah. That's it's awesome to hear that the realization. I think a lot of people, when they think of spirituality, you think of the woo-woo stuff and kind of these super realizations about the world and how it operates. But it's good to hear that. I think a lot of people get lost in that avoidance of reality. It's kind of like that's how I see some super spiritual people. It's like, yeah, I acknowledge that there is this thing, but it's also it has to exist within the world that we are living in to be, I think, a productive member of society, someone that can function, yeah, just within the realms of kind of the real world, if you would. I think some, and that's fine if you want to live like that. I guess that's how you've decided to kind of live. But yeah, I just find, especially for a young man or a guy, like um, having the notion of it or the idea of it and understanding, but also, yeah, living within reality is like is kind of an important thing.
Well, the problem there, Aaron, is that a lot of people are taking on the philosophy which says the world, society, the mind, the ego, oh, these aren't real.
Mm.
And and I just think that is the falsehood there. That is the sophistry, right? Sophistry is clever reasoning that seems to be somehow very smart and true, but it's not.
Mm.
And so once you have this like illusion theory of life and you're going to regard, all your thoughts as just illusion and your mind is just this silly troublemaker, I think that's the path. And then they say, well, life, all whatever happens in my life, it doesn't really matter. I shouldn't listen to my thoughts.
Mm.
There's no self because you see that maybe you're not your persona or your social self-image. So then supposedly that means you have no self. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Mm.
Um, but we do have a psyche. We do have a fairly stable personality through our lives
Mm.
that is the vehicle of our spiritual growth. And as I see it, like uh, we do go onward to the afterlife. I totally believe in the immortal soul based on my study and listening to near death experiences. They're astounding.
Mm.
They're absolutely astounding. So I guess my experience to just give you, if it makes sense to you, to give you like a brief summary of that.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Um, my experience was like a heightening of consciousness and a kind of like an energetic rebirth almost is what happened to me. And I was studying the teachings of Eckhart Tolle and I was becoming really present and peaceful for a couple of years. I was a lot more calm and I was kind of observing the mind. It was almost like I needed this boot camp of like observing the mind. And it did stifle me a little. Like I became more repressed almost.
Mm.
but I became more peaceful and I was becoming more clear and I was gaining more of like a mastery of my, my mental patterns. And it taught me to kind of sit still and listen instead of just talk. And uh, I was diving into that side of things. And at some point, I kind of went, this was in 2006. I was just in a very contemplative season, spending time outdoors, meditating, etc. And I just started to fall into this deep stillness of mind that was spontaneous. And I realized at the time, I thought, I guess I am this consciousness, right? And I mean, it's a kind of fairly typical idea, but I kind of somehow swallowed that in some way. And I started to fall into this samadhi, we call it, where it's a deep stillness of the mind.
Mm,
And it felt like something very sacred. Like it wasn't just calmness.
mm.
I was always a very calm person. I was never anxious. But this was like a deeper, almost holy kind of silence of mind. And then I was at a restaurant with some friends and I realized I was like filled with bliss. Like I was intoxicated with like the natural bliss of consciousness, I guess.
Wow.
And they call it Sat Chidananda in the Indian uh, texts,
Mm.
means being, consciousness, bliss. And that Sat Chidananda was just like arising in me. And I was looking at people like as if I was a baby. Like I had no self consciousness, I had no fear. I was like almost like newborn. And my friends were like looking at me and saying, what's going on with you? And I, I said, like, I'm just having some spiritual experiences. And this girl said, like, oh, I guess that's why you're so zen.
Mm.
And I erupted into this spontaneous laughter that like took over me. Like it was a spontaneous thing. It was like kind of like these Zen stories. And then when the laughter stopped, um, I started breathing really heavily, as if I was like going into labor or something. And I started breathing like this. Something seized me, and I started breathing really heavily. And the people who study Kundalini and all that will recognize it. And then I just thought, like, let it happen. And then as I said that, this like lightning bolt of energy went up through me, out of my head, and like I lost consciousness of the world.
Wow.
And I believe it's called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's like a cessation of the mind and the world. And when I regained consciousness, just was chuckling there at the table, like as if I was, like the universe was chuckling or laughing through me. It was just like this soft laughter. And I didn't have any sense of personality or self consciousness or anything. Like it was a sense of being reborn and uh, almost like my mind was somehow dipped in eternity and then came back.
Incredible.
So,
And how old were you?
and
How old were you at this time?
I was about 31. And
Well,
then for months after that, I just had this very deep stillness of mind, and people could feel around me that, you know, something had happened to me. And one guy at my school, like we met for a dissertation discussion, and he said, I don't know what happened to you, but I'm happy for you. It was like it was such a holy experience of like a silence of mind and
mm,
a clarity. I felt like I could see through people. My intuition was like powerful.
mm.
My people who were like intuitives that I met later would say like your energy field is like so huge, and they would kind of comment on it. And I knew what they were talking about, even if
Mm.
I didn't think in those ways. Like I understood it.
Sure.
There had been like a big opening.
And
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 what I found after, sorry.
and so that came through a lot of meditation and just sitting with yourself, kind of a lot of time in nature as well, or
I meditated, like I didn't meditate in a regimented way. I just was I was inhabiting like a stillness and in my daily life, just being still,
Mm,
walking in nature. And I had done a lot. I was actually doing Jungian analysis at the time, and I was having a lot of like I'd had a lot of opening before that. I'd had a lot of very vibrant, powerful dreams. I was in a very good place. And like a lot of people talk about a spiritual awakening, like, oh, you falling apart and I'm losing everything I love. This is absolute nonsense.
yeah.
Most people who have a genuine, deep, like a rising of consciousness, I'll call it, they're not in this ego destruction and all that. I consider that a dangerous myth, honestly.
Mm. You hear that a lot. Like if you do reading about it, a lot of people say it's like it's meant to be a struggle. That's
Now that they're not even that's more for people who are not don't even know themselves and are not. I know they're not going to agree with me, but it's really people who haven't done a lot of work and they're having all this stuff churn up from the unconscious,
mm,
which they think is their ego dissolving, and it's not.
mm,
It is not, and they're nowhere near like that kind of natural conscious clarity.
mm,
They're nowhere near that. Most people who have this, their conscious clarity before that shift,
mm,
they would actually be you'd have a very subtle and clear mind.
mm,
That's kind of like in the traditional scriptures of like Vedanta and so forth, that is like the prerequisite or the usual for before there's like a deeper shift, is that you actually have a very calm mind, you have a clear mind to for discernment, and
mm,
you have a lot of natural samadhi, which I had, stillness of mind. I already had a pretty still mind.
mm,
And then like the lightning comes on. And this idea that falling apart and becoming an existential mess is like that means you're about to be enlightened.
mm.
Like I don't I think it's a very dangerous myth that has been pushed by, ironically, many spiritual teachers. I don't I think many of them are quite mistaken.
Mm. Um,
But
yeah, I think it's just
people can disagree.
yeah, I think it's just a popular kind of way of framing it because then you can build from this place of destruction or something. I guess that might be
Well,
the way that
look, we can all depending on what's going on in our lives and what we're churning, this unconscious thing is happening, this kind of change, we can always say like something's dying and something's being reborn, and you can describe almost anything as an awakening.
Mm,
But I take a more like, I'm not really wedded to any particular tradition, but I did study more traditional Vedic, you know, paths, and I think that a traditional view is like you can't just describe all these things as awakening.
mm.
Uh, Usually, that real awakening of Satchitananda would come from having a very clear and pure mind, usually.
And
So,
I think especially now that's like it's a hard thing to achieve or maybe get to just because we're in such an age of like attention capture and the amount of stimulus, like you've got a phone, you've got a small computer on you at all times that's beeping and showing you things and you're paying attention to that. So this idea that to getting to this state of like a still and present mind, I think from an intuitive aspect, I feel like to be present and to maintain the presence of mind. seems to be a way of getting to that point that you're discussing. Like just to have that presence to be in the moment all the time. But it's a difficult thing to do nowadays. It's such a tough thing to maintain because of, social media, maybe career expectations, other like, a lot of stuff that goes on. Um, yeah, to really experience that clarity and presence of mind in today's age, I find to be a tough thing.
Carl, yeah, you're absolutely right. Carl Jung said that back then, he was talking in terms of the Tao from the view of Chinese philosophy, which he studied as well.
Mm,
But he said you can experience the Tao, like the archetypal arising of the Tao, like a luminous experience of wholeness or consciousness, such as I had. He actually called it the numinous, like a numen in Latin. It means like a sacred experience, an ineffable experience. He said it would tend to arise when you are aligned in your life, when you are sort of fulfilling in your life, whether you're a young man or you're 50 years old or you're 70 years old, when you have fulfilled in your purpose for that time in your life and you're in this sort of alignment, that is when a luminous experience will tend to arise. And so I think that's what I'm getting at is that um, you can have a phone nowadays, everyone has a phone or what have you, but if you are aligned in your life and fulfilling like the Tao from within in some sense, that it's the right moment and things are coming together
mm,
and you're with yourself there, that's when, and if there's some kind of readiness for it, that's when an ineffable revelation will tend to come to people.
mm. Yeah. So totally makes sense. So when your inner self is aligned with what you're doing externally to a high extent,
Yeah, there's that archetypal sense of I'm in the right place. I'm doing what nature wants me to do. I'm moving in the flow of life in the right way.
mm,
And Jung talked about that in terms of the hero's journey as the journey of the self of all of us,
mm,
that there are certain archetypal movements we're making through the journey that when we come to that point and we have sort of done our homework, fulfilled our task,
mm,
showed up, in different ways, uh, then that tends to bring about that luminous sense of some kind of transcendent experience that comes to you that gives you the validation of where you are on the path. Now, for me, being an introvert and a more mystically oriented person, that was that experience. For another person, it might be something else to do with divine love and connection with this whole room full of people, or some kind of, sorry,
yeah, you're good.
transcendent. So yeah, my phone was ringing. So it can be different for each person.
Mm. Yeah, and I think even in the Bible, I think it's the story of Abraham or something where he goes off to travel and then comes back. I can't remember exactly, but it's very much that idea of like going on a journey, finding what it is that you connect with or that makes you fills you up, and then exploring that and fulfilling fulfilling that path. So you're right, it can be. It doesn't have to be defined to one aspect. It can be, you might enjoy this, someone else might enjoy that, but it's just a matter of being aligned with what it is that you're doing, that's really going to.
Yeah, yeah. From the Jungian view, that's the key. It's to be aligned with yourself, to fulfill your unique personality. That is the most spiritual thing that you can really do. And as you do so, you will come to whatever kind of validating, deep spiritual experience or illumination that you may need to.
Mm,
And on the note of like well, what do I how do I do that? How do I get more aligned? I had this quote I wanted to read that I just always love to bring it up,
Yeah.
where Jung says that where I was saying that people need to look at where they're blocked, where they might be stuck, and what their talents are.
Mm,
And Jung said, where fear is, there is your task. Because wherever you are in life, wherever there's that fear and that holding back or that blockage, that is where you need to be looking at. What am I? Uh, is there something I'm avoiding in my life? Because according to Jung, that avoidance, that is what creates a kind of morbid kind of anxiety and dread and guilt, right? Existential guilt, because I'm avoiding myself. I'm not really facing my life. So life has a way of working with you to awaken you. And Jung says, for the hero, fear is a challenge and a task because only boldness can deliver from fear.
mm,
And if the risk is not taken, then the meaning of life is somehow violated and the whole future is condemned to hopeless staleness. So if the risk is not taken, if there's not a leap and boldness and facing into yourself and the world
mm,
together, then it's like you're copping out, right? You're going to avoid, and what happens? Your life starts to become more gray. You
mm,
start to get morbid symptoms. You have more anxiety. The fear grows.
mm.
So there's a kind of ethic there of like embracing life and letting life make you conscious. And only by doing that in alignment with yourself and knowing yourself do you come to any kind of, you know, fuller sense of wholeness or transcendence. So that's where I've come to in my life for sure.
Yeah, super insightful. I think it's to oversimplify it, it's like people talk a lot about getting out of your comfort zone. There is growth, there is growth only on the outside. If you're in your comfort zone, you're not expanding, you're not growing. It is getting over these fears constantly that is like, even from a psychological standpoint, you're training your brain to just become more
Yeah,
resilient, and you're going to have a much more impactful life if you are challenging fears that come up, because if you're
absolutely.
staying stagnant, you're not growing. I don't know how much
Yeah.
more time you have, uh,
I've
so
got a couple minutes. We can
oh
spend a couple minutes wrapping up, I'd say.
yeah, so I just wanted to ask you, how do you rectify if you're happy to talk about it, just quickly. It's probably not a quick thing to talk about. I just wanted to ask you for my own personal, um, something that I grapple with now that I'm studying psychology is like, how do you kind of, and we may have talked about it a little bit, but even practicing, how do you bring or rectify the spirituality with psychology? Because I know the Jungian style is errs on the spiritual side probably a little bit more, or the not so scientifically backed clinical.
It's not materialist.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just wonder how you rectify the two ideals, spirituality, psychology. It's kind of almost like science and religion a little bit, in my eyes, or maybe I'm not seeing it correctly. I don't know.
I just well, I hope it helps to just say that I just think that our spiritual path is our psyche.
Okay, yeah.
Our psyche gives us our spirituality, and as long as spirituality is interpreted as some kind of I need to, like the idea, like I said, that I just need this, the purpose of our lives is to not suffer, like, or escape suffering. I don't believe that's the purpose of our lives. I think it's more to discover love, courage, strength, passion, creativity, and to become the person God wants you to be.
Hmm.
I don't mind using that theistic language. I mean, I think that's how we discover divinity and fullness and connection is in and through our own psychological self-actualization. That's my view of it. It's there's an ancient saying that the one who knows themselves knows God.
Hmm.
I mean, that's kind of a big claim, but I think it's only through the self. And regarding the self, like it's not saying that your self is, hey, Aaron, it's whatever ideas you have about yourself, that's you. No, it's not in self-image. It's the fullness of your own being and the unfathomable sort of depths of the soul that is you, this conscious being that is you.
Mm.
That is your spirituality, and the vehicle of that is your personality, your character as it moves through life.
Mm.
So I just think the Jungian view is more like feet on the ground, and like, yes, you can look at the stars as well, but it has to be both. That's how I see it. And also, I want to say like the Jungian view is saying there's a balance between like spirituality is not only feeling,
Mm.
right? It's not only intuition, it's feeling and thinking. It's intuition and sensing.
Mm.
It's not like only one of these things. It's not like only the heart matters. Like, no, our mind, our knowledge, our sense of truth and reality and psychological objectivity also matters. So we have to work on a lot of spirituality for me is like working on the areas where you're weaker in life because that brings balance to your psyche. And it also brings where you're weaker is where you're more unconscious.
Mm.
So that's the natural path of coming to consciousness is by looking where you're unconscious and learning how to work with your unconscious as well as with dreams and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just find that, and maybe I'm just oversimplifying my what I'm learning at the moment because it is I'm learning it. So it's like they're going to teach you the science-based stuff, but I think it just the teaching anyway lacks that part of it, lacks the soul.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, a lot of the science-based supposed psychology or psychotherapy is not even all that psychologically or scientifically
mm,
rigorous as it would seem to be. They
mm,
say empirically based this and that, but
yeah.
it's a little bit illusory, honestly.
And we're so complex as humans that I just think to purely dwindle it down to those kind of
Yeah.
aspects is you're missing a whole the most important side of who a person is. That's just my thoughts anyway. So I'm kind of at the moment grappling with these ideas as I'm studying. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I don't think anxiety
Yeah.
just comes from this neurotransmitter and maybe something you experienced as a kid. I think there's a whole lot more that's going on.
Yeah.
So that's just what
Yeah. There.
personally what I'm dealing with at the moment when I'm studying. I just thought I would ask you that question for my own personal
Yeah.
gain.
You have to take that kind of reductionism with a grain of salt or more.
Yeah.
They always want to have pretend that scientific research has these answers or almost has the answer. No, they really don't.
Mm,
So you go along with it, and you get your degree, and then you can go deeper into you
yeah.
know philosophical thinking, maybe Jungian studies and so forth.
Yeah.
That'd be my recommendation.
Thank you so much for talking to me. And I'd like to talk to you again maybe a bit later on as I progress through my
Yeah.
talk to more people. We can touch on some other topics because I think you've got some very
Mhm.
insightful, yeah,
Mhm.
very insightful thinking and
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be good.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure, and I'd love to talk again, Aaron. Really, I like what you're doing with your channel, and I wish you well. Meanwhile, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. And do you do online stuff? Do you do online therapy
Yeah,
and stuff like that? So people can reach out
yeah.
if
I work. I
taking
I
class.
actually work with people around the world. Yeah,
Awesome. So
yeah,
I'll put some info in the bio, and then if people want to reach out, any guys that maybe are interested in what we've been talking about, they can
yeah,
get in touch.
yeah. That'd be great. Thank you, Aaron.
Good on you.